So it means actually that we want to have customers which are giving us feedback in a regular mode so that we actually testing new ideas quite quickly and actually also get overall their feedback so that we can learn, adapt, and actually bring it back in a much more mature prototype element here.
Rising above the buzz of ultrasonic cleaners and the clanking of stainless steel are the ideas and voices that are changing an industry. You're listening to the Beyond Clean podcast, the central nexus for the people, processes, and products that are improving our sterile processing world. Each week, we speak with frontline technicians, CEOs, engineers, and entrepreneurs with a common goal to help you fight dirty. Every instrument, every time. Whether you're tuning in for education or inspiration, we're glad you did. Now, turn on those washers and turn up the volume. It's time to go beyond clean.
On this Vendor Spotlight, we speak with Mohammed Murad, Regional Business Owner of Connectivity at Belimed US, and Philip Heim, Global Head for Digitalization at Belimed AG. And this one is for the data heads. That's right. And especially data heads that love information that can be available on their smartphones in a cloud solution. And we're going to specifically be talking about ways to automate record keeping into the instrument tracking system from the equipment in the department, and then also being able to have access to that information on your smartphone, whether you're in the department or not. So a huge advantage in terms of having access to information and status of the equipment if you are a system director, or maybe you're at home as a supervisor or as a manager of a sterile processing department as well. It's also going to be baked in terms of education. So for all of you educators out there, getting some trainings that are built in, and just in terms of being able to automatically troubleshoot any issues, those resources being built into the technology. We're going to talk a lot about that, including the development strategy that Belimed put into place after a short break. And we'll be right back with Mohammed Murad and Philip Heim.
From 17 Studios, you're listening to Beyond Clean, the global voice of sterile processing.
We are speaking with Mohammed Murad, Regional Business Owner of Connectivity at Belimed US, and Philip Heim, Global Head for Digitalization at Belimed AG. And gentlemen, I'm really excited to be talking to you today about your SmartHub technology. And I know we'll kind of dive in a little bit deeper and talk about the company as well, but just having the right information to be able to manage your department is so critical. And so I'm so excited for this conversation. Murad, I'm going to start with you first. I want to welcome you to the show, and maybe you could just tell everybody a little bit about yourself.
Hey, Justin, thank you so much. I'm happy to be here. And I'm Mohammed Murad. I'm the Regional Business Owner for Connectivity at Belimed, USA. And throughout my career, I've been a part of various sales and business development roles, and started with always newer and upcoming technology. And so here we are.
Excellent. And Philip, why don't you talk about your background as well?
Sure. Thank you, Justin, and thanks for having me here. I'm based in Switzerland, as Belimed is also a Swiss-based company. However, we are global active here from the US, but also Europe and in China. And so I'm also responsible looking to turn our data into meaningful insights for our SPD customers.
Well, let's talk about that a little bit more too as we dive in, but maybe an overview of Belimed in general. I'd be surprised if anyone in our listening audience hadn't had some contact with somebody from Belimed at some point, during their careers, but there could be some people that are new. Can you just talk a little bit about the products and services that you provide?
Sure. So Belimed has a long history in the SPD itself. So we're actually serving just the SPD, and that's our absolute focus here. And so coming from Belimed. So what we provide is definitely a portfolio of all the washers and disinfectors in many different, let's say, sizes, up to cleaning baths from very small washers and disinfectors. Even when we actually go to the next step, all the sterilizers also in different sizes that we actually provide to our market. And so really play hard on the fact to help our customers reprocessing the instruments in hospitals. But on the other side, what we also provide here is definitely also what is around the machine itself. So everything which is coming with the machine, such as also consumables, chemical. There is also all the digitalization part that we dive in more as we speak here. But then obviously also the whole service part is actually what we actually bring to our machines to keep all the machines which actually last for years, right, in a hospital in a good shape here and always in an uptime situation.
We did a really nice job of kind of setting the table because we are going to be talking about data and specifically highlighting your SmartHub solution. But I feel like sterile processing has always been sort of struggling to be staying up with the times, especially in healthcare. And we see lots of technology emerging in the operating room. And I feel like sterile processing, traditionally, it's getting a lot better. And sometimes it's been really related to budgeting for the hospitals as well. It's not like the technology wasn't out there, but the adoption rate, due to cost and everything else might have been a little bit of a deterrent. We're starting to catch up now. But the problem is that in many cases, people didn't know how to even utilize the data that they had. And then they had all this massive amounts of data. And how do they then make that actionable when they haven't traditionally had access to it and they haven't been trained on how to data mine for areas that are really obvious to making, a more efficiently run department. So what did you see specifically from the Belimed perspective around data and maybe even just the underutilization of data specifically around equipment?
Right. So that's a good question, Justin here. So let me take a bit of a journey or take you on a journey back 2.5 years, which is when we started actually on how can we support our SPD managers? And that's the main persona that we actually want to make their days easier and let's say more efficient. And so how we started is actually purely on an ideation workshop internally where we put together crazy thinkers, people in the organization from different departments, and they come up with a bunch of ideas, right, which we call in the world of digitalization use cases. And so that was actually the start. And then as a next step is it's always good to get the customer at the very, very beginning into the whole conversation. So that's where we actually went out to our customers globally and asked them about what's the value of our ideas and use cases that we bring here into Prospect. And so from there, we actually started pretty soon with another element which we brought in, which was named co-creation customers. So let me give you a quick intro into co-creation. What does it mean? So it means actually that we want to have customers which are giving us feedback in a regular mode so that we actually testing new ideas quite quickly and actually also get overall their feedback so that we can learn, adapt, and actually bring it back in a much more mature prototype element here. So that was actually started then also 2.5 years ago when we started a relationship with 4 co-creation customers globally, because we also have a diverse market in a sense that there is different ways of reprocessing, whether this is in US, whether this is in Europe, and we also want to capture these different angles here to this element of digitalization. So having these 4 co-creation customers, they actually were quite involved in starting from paper where we actually talked about what are your main problems that you need to solve on a daily basis. Tell me more about your main problems. Tell me more about your day in the life that you actually run as an SPD manager. Where can we help you with data to overcome these challenges? And so that was kind of the start of the whole journey of digitalization. And ultimately, the end, or let's say not the end, but actually the middle of the journey was that we had a so-called clickable prototype. And this clickable prototype really showed nicely and actually come more to the point that you asked about how we can bring value to with data, was actually a good prototype to get this visualized, because data are so abstract by the end of the day. So you need to visualize that. You need to bring this into a picture for the SPD manager that he can actually, let's say, comment and actually also give straightforward feedback to make it even more better here.
I love the way you went about developing the solution and engaging the end users. I've heard a lot of entrepreneurs even come on this show and some of the other podcasts that I do, and they talk about developing the solution for the end user. And I've seen a big shift in that, but at the same time, the end user doesn't always they have the end user experience part that has to come to the table, but they don't necessarily have the experience that all the details that go into servicing equipment behind the scenes and the perspective of the manufacturer. And while I'm sure everybody is always kind of doing a little bit of both, I like how you organized your thoughts and then brought that to the customer base and said, are these good ideas? So you actually started them in a certain area that kept you focused on what you were targeting with the development. So you just said something that was really interesting about being able to visualize the data. And I think making it actionable was kind of my words was, okay, now we take this data, we break it down. What is that visualization like, and what does it allow them to do, or what are the benefits of visualizing relevant data versus just getting a big data dump that they kind of mine on their own?
Sure. So ultimately, putting data into a visualizing element is a lot about dashboard, right? So by the end of the day that we talk about bringing them into a picture that I see in terms of how has my last 6 months performed, for example, on a machine performance? How was my last 12 months? How do I basically balance my machines based on the numbers of cycles? Are they equally used? Because it's like taking one machine more often, because that's the closest path to this machine. So that machine is basically running all the time, but there is actually two more which never be tapped because that's the longer way to go. So that's basically something that we also bring into transparency and bring into an overall dashboard so that the SPD manager can actually take actions based on good visualization element here.
Yeah, I think mining the data in sort of an automated fashion in a way is extremely helpful because it saves time. It saves, training and energy that way, allows them to focus on what I would say is a KPI or key performance indicators of the equipment. Now, some facilities have instrument tracking systems. I would say the adoption of that over the last 5 years especially has definitely improved. But there was a time, not much more than a decade ago, that I would say a lot of departments out there in sterile processing did not even have an instrument tracking system. And so there's a lot of data that can be collected in that instrument tracking system, but like errors and things like that, how often is that integrated with the equipment, and does it have the right level of detail? And then you've got clinical educators that are really sort of handed off this responsibility for trying to teach people how to read the information and do something with it. Is that what you found was a big challenge for a lot of departments? And did that result in downtime for your equipment because there was this whole trying to figure out how they were going to handle the situation and sort of triaging any kind of service or anything when there was an error?
So ultimately, and you tapped on the fact on the instrument tracking system. So what we are also doing is every cycle has also a cycle report and a batch file, which will be generated from our side, which we basically bring our data into a graphical element, which is easy to read, of course, but also the numbers are actually shown in a table, and definitely also is it going to be passed or failed itself, so that this message is also conveyed to the end user here. So ultimately that's what we're currently doing. And of course then sharing the data with an instrument tracking system is the next step here, so that they can wrap it up, put the instrument and the sieves which are on. So in order to actually fully approve then the whole cycle. But in the fact that there is no instrument tracking system, that's actually the only valid document, which is actually also then in many cases still printed out and not even stored digital. But that's now also a game changer that we said we want to store this digitally in a cloud environment so that there is no need for any servers on site anymore. And we ultimately want to actually reprocess instruments, but we don't want to build another data center right in the hospital.
When I first left nursing and joined a company that serviced sterile processing departments, I had a mentor who really brought me up to speed on everything. She was also previously a nurse. She was a department manager for, I think 2 decades at that point. And I remember she was showing me all of the logs. And it was all those paper printouts put in a notebook. And then we went into this closet and it was taking up all of the space. And I always thought to myself, I'm like, it's great that you have the logs, but seriously, how do you organize this information to go back and be able to look at it? And then we kind of went through a second phase where then, to your point, that information might maybe from the manufacturer of the equipment would come up with a solution to be able to store that information. And so now we had electronic record keeping, but we still didn't have interfacing and actionable insights. And so I'm kind of going to come over to you, Murad, because I think this is where the SmartHub, and I know there's two components we're going to be talking about, but tell me how, SmartHub on a high level really starts to address that various concern and the evolution of record keeping and then record keeping with a purpose.
Of course. When we talk about SmartHub, so again, two components, if you want to think about it that way. So where it started, when we go, again, a little bit back in time, we had machines, then we basically had the sterile process workflow that required documentation from the machines as a part of the entire sterile workflow. So originally, there was a piece of software that was built or developed as a data logger. So machine is running some processes. The software is interfacing, basically collecting all that data, creates a cycle report out of that data, like filtering it and manipulating it, and sends it to the instrument tracking system. Very basic functionality, and then that is where we started. So Belimed developed our own small patch of software, which sort of acted as a middleware. Now, when we're looking at, and again, basically just continuing the data specific portions of Philip's comments like earlier, there's a lot of data that we do not utilize out of those. Even today, the primary piece would be basically, let's have an interface that runs successfully and automates this data transfer from your equipment to your instrument tracking system. And out of, for example, 100 data points, we might be inserting 30 or 40 or maybe 50 data points into that cycle report. What about the other 50? So, which has a lot of equipment detail on how the equipment itself is functioning. It may have nothing to do with the cycle itself, but based on what is the health of your sensors, what's the health of your equipment, and so on. So we've pulled that additional information. We've kind of sifted through it, and then we are observing trends. And we use this additional triggers, these additional data points to actually create an application that provides the end user a little bit more interaction with this back-end interface. So now, earlier, there was something of a small software, you install it, set it, and forget it. Now you can see what that software is doing. You can see what the machines are doing. One of the biggest problems that we're kind of trying to address here with SmartHub is visibility. So departments are various sized, there are various shapes, different styles of working in departments as well. So in some cases, we've got smaller departments where the staff is right in front of the machines, always in front of the machines. Anything goes wrong, they can see it right there. But now that we're seeing, especially with larger offsites, so they are more structured. They're basically the 3-tier system where we have separate decontam or separate cleaner side and then a sterile side. And you have staff kind of at times moving through these 3 sections.
Well, and what about the system directors too, Murad, right? The system directors are never going to be on that granular level. And yet at the same time, they're the ones with the most experience to say, hey, this is who we need to contact. This is what we need to do. They're totally about that kind of strategy. And so with those two components, I know they're named SmartHub Connect and SmartHub Orbit. And you talked about there's these 50 pieces of data, but what about the other 50? I want to kind of put this back to you, and you tell me if I have this right. SmartHub Connect is the 50 pieces of data that you would need for record keeping and logging in the instrument tracking system. But the other 50 pieces of data are really relevant to the equipment, the trending on the equipment, and being proactive to prevent downtime on the equipment by seeing things in advance. And that's really where SmartHub Orbit comes in, and this is a cloud-based application. So if you were a system director of sterile processing, you'd be able to pull it up on your mobile device, and you'd be able to look at all of that trending data with the Orbit about the equipment that wouldn't necessarily be something that you would look at in an instrument tracking system. Do I have that correct?
That is very, very accurate. Now, when we talk about the actual basic functionality, that needs to reside on site. But when we talk about interaction with that data, that needs to be available everywhere and anywhere now. And as I was kind of like describing, we've got a lot of staff that is in the department, but a lot of like support staff, like, or even like a management staff. I mean, like, especially when we talk about CSSD leadership or biomed, they're not usually in the department. So how do we get those data points and the equipment snapshot, if you want to call it, like available to them? So that's the reason why we actually focused on developing this application on the cloud, so that it can be accessible anywhere, like by a user using any device that has a browser. So they can be in the hospital, they could be like on a train, they could be at their homes. I mean, like, and then they would, once they log in,
or on vacation.
Exactly.
Right? Because the regional director of SPD doesn't really get a vacation, as we all know. And I'm really glad you brought up Biomed, because it's not just about presenting the information to the stakeholders in SPD. There are sometimes, maybe somebody in the operating room or somebody in operations that's a little bit, up chain, wants to have some visibility to that kind of information. They might use it less often. They might not be as, involved in it on a day-to-day basis, but they might want to have access. Something that you told me as we prepared for this interview was that depending on the stakeholder and what's important to them, that you can do different configurations. So am I understanding this right? That you can tailor it. So like, let's say Biomed only needed to see a few things, that when they go into SmartHub Orbit, they just see the relevant information that's relevant to them that they would want to know about. Whereas, somebody as a system director might get more pieces. When you talk about various configurations for the stakeholders, is that what that means?
That is exactly what it means. And one of the key aspects of our solution, and then like a pretty strong value prop we've got a lot of feedback on, has been the ease of use of the product. And why is it easy to use? Because it's only showing me the data that I need to see. I mean, like, when we talk about a lot of softwares have a lot of like different capability, and then it may extend into some things, like depending on what you want to do with it. So if I am biomed, for example, or leadership, so I would be more interested in reading metrics on the systems, like how much time is my equipment up, what is the percentage of my downtimes? How many times have like certain errors cropped up over a 3-month period, and so on. When we talk about an SPD tech, what they're worried about is how many trays I can scan. Is there anything that is stopping me by scanning in my loads? If there's anything going wrong with the machine, can I get it back up again? And I need to have the equipment manual accessible to me at all times. So you see, there's different levels of information that each user would require. And then that is exactly what we try to give.
So these big, like, software as a service solutions with lots of data in them. I mean, I actually own a company that does have a SaaS solution into healthcare. And I've been through all these crazy, like, IT questionnaires and security surveys. And I know what that's like. But the real one that seems to be the biggest trigger to slow things down is whether or not the technology is going to have access to PHI. And I kind of want to put this back. Either one of you can answer this question, honestly. But does it access personal health information in any way, or does it carve out away from that for a much easier or more streamlined implementation for the customers?
Our solutions do not require or store or collect any protected health information, or even like personally identifiable information. The reason being, we are only pulling in data from our machines. And when you put a load in a machine, like for washing or for sterilization, the patient health part basically resides on the instrument tracking system, not with the equipment interface, as we basically would like to call our solution. So it is safe in that manner. At the same time, now, even though it is just this equipment information, we're still basically implementing security controls such as encryption during transmission, as well as when we're storing it in our cloud servers. So we're still protecting that data, which basically means that the application is safer to use, and we do not have any risk of outing any protected information or any sensitive information.
It's really important what you just said, because sometimes you'll hear about encryption, but it only happens, at rest when it's already on your server, but it's not encrypted in, transmission or in motion, right? And so that's where there's a vulnerability. So I know IT security departments, when they look at a solution, they love that. Exactly what you just said. It's encrypted for transfer, and it's encrypted once it's in rest in your base. Philip, did you have anything that you kind of wanted to add to the conversation?
Yeah, definitely. There's one thing that I want to just bring in as an analogy here is the fact that you just said on SPD directors are always, not always, but also sometimes on vacations as such. So right now an SPD director books his flights on a mobile phone. He actually watches his forecast on a mobile phone. Maybe he's even controlling his camera at home. There is no, let's say, other dog entering my house, for example. So there is a lot of things that is actually already happening with digitalization out there where we actually run in a private environment. So that was also a thing. Why is this not just happening also for the SPD, right, itself? Why are we not capable to see when our machine's starting, when do they ending, what's the status, or any alarm messages? Again, just simple on a mobile phone, and that's what we now created as well. And actually talking about simplicity is also that we spend a lot of time with user experience people, so which actually are really driven to make it as usable as possible. And actually our acronym was always make it as simple as Facebook, for example, as an application. So there is no training associated. We just want to actually hand over the application to the customer, and they just start and running it, right, without any further ado.
All right, so just a couple more points I want to get to before we tell everybody what your customers have said about SmartHub, and then give them information about how they can reach out to you. The first one is, we talked a lot about how this has trending and everything else, but what about alerting when there's an issue? Just on the piggyback of what you just said, it's not like a system director wants to log into SmartHub Orbit and be checking like you might with Facebook, while you're on vacation. They're not going to necessarily want to do that, but they're going to want to know when there's a major issue. Is there alerting in the system I am on vacation and only the stuff that's critical kind of bubbles to the surface for me?
Well, definitely, so that you can actually select which critical alarms are you really want to be notified on, right? So you maybe don't want to just be notified on simple warnings that a machine is also producing, so that only the critical ones are shown up and you can actually also interact. So, vacation is definitely one thing, but also even if you get up in the morning and just checking quickly what happened with my machines during the night, for example, right? If there is anything that I need to be cautious on, or I need to commute earlier on to the office, maybe I have to shift the team a bit different. So that's also what we're hearing from customers here, helping them not always get into a big surprise when they enter into the office at the morning.
That is a really important point too. And it also talks not only about alerting, but you had talked about sort of that trending information, et cetera. And I'm assuming that allows people to schedule maintenance in advance. Again, we were talking earlier, being proactive, taking care of things before they become an issue. But then what about, and this goes back to the educators and the amount of time that they spend. And honestly, with the staffing crisis that we're in, most educators are ending up spending a lot of time just filling open vacancies and roles and jobs in the department, and less time educating, unfortunately, because it is so key. So how does this solution help with troubleshooting and sort of like, I'm brand new, 3 months, 4 months on the job, something comes up, and maybe the educator isn't there that day, or I kind of forgot because I'm still drinking from a fire hose in terms of all of the things that I have to do in my job every day. How do you make sure that people are able to access information for troubleshooting in real time? How does that built into this program?
That's actually a good point that you're bringing up here. And that's also what we have seen talking to these co-creation customers, and then actually go even broader. So there is, in most cases, there is a lot of, let's say, small things which have to be sorted out. And so what we actually started in is getting the alarm message visualized in SmartHub Orbit. And based on the alarm messages, we also say, what is it basic? What's the name of the alarm which is popping up? It's not just P118, which is nobody's understand. So it's really giving a proper name here. And then based on the whole message is also giving a hint. And so the SPD operator here can actually, or the manager itself can actually tap on the link, which is in Orbit, and that directly, we open up a so-called troubleshooting video, which is actually dedicated to the alarm message, which appears on SmartHub Orbit. So that we just show him or her what is basically, let's say, next steps in order to fix it, so that we have, again, a high uptime and bring the machine to life much faster than getting into contact with our Belimed service people. And so that is actually first reaction that they can do on site. So keep up high uptime here is definitely what we're helping them.
And so I just kind of use that example of me being a new employee, just starting in sterile processing. I talked about the educators and them being reallocated, to just make sure the throughput is where it needs to be in the staffing crisis that we're having. But, also a big part of that is competency when you're a new employee and developing those competencies. So I hear the troubleshooting piece, but how do you help the customers that, whether they have an educator or not, build competencies for new employees to make sure that they kind of understand how to use the equipment?
So what we have started is also, and now fully embedded into the product, let's say, make all the trainings digital, and we call that e-learning. So what is e-learning? So e-learnings are dedicated education pieces, all available on Orbit, so that depending on the role, you actually choose your different modules on the training. So for example, what kind of instruments do I have? How do I load them to a rack? How do I load a rack to the machine? What are the programs? How do I select the program? So there's so many aspects that I need to learn, right? And so the SPD director itself is basically freed up by this time, because the employee itself can actually take the e-learning, and even at the very end, they can actually download their certificates, so that we also prove that this employee has done the e-learning right now properly, has also answered the question. So it's really a mix of videos, questions, very interactive for learning here. So new state of the art.
Just to add to that, now when we're talking about education now we don't always need to have a classroom setting, and that is where the trend of education is going. So it's learning at your own pace. And we've designed our e-learning modules very similar to the way we do in-service on-site. So whenever any new machines are delivered, or even, for example, if we want to do refreshed education for the staff on-site, usually on a schedule with most of our customers, but there are some customers who are so busy that they do not have time to kind of schedule out batches and then have someone in there for 40 or 50 minutes trying to explain all of that.
Yeah, one-on-one, actual time taken, two people. And one of those resources is one of the most experienced in the department.
Exactly. And then now how do we get around that? So we give the end user the ability to kind of pick and choose the modules that they want to. They can complete one module, go back to the next module, maybe 2 days later, and so on. They can do it while they're in the department, on a break, for example, or even if they're traveling on a train. So do not need to be in the department again to kind of undertake that training.
So they're not interrupting workflow.
Exactly. And one more thing to clarify here is this is not replacing the in-servicing that Belimed always does. It's basically just enhancing that and then filling the gaps, because we cannot be there always every day, on training resources.
I think third shift immediately, Murad. I'm
Exactly.
thinking about, and if they have a day off, trying to come in the middle of the night or at the beginning of the shift at 11 or 6 a.m. for one person, sometimes can be pretty difficult, in certain scenarios. And when you do the in-servicing, you really want to get a big group. And sometimes people just need a little bit more help to achieve competency. And that's really kind of a one-on-one versus in-servicing the entire department. And so I think that really fills a nice niche there too. And I do want to talk about what some of your international customers have said about SmartHub. So I'm going to read a couple of quotes here, and then each of you can kind of react to that. And I love hearing from the international audience too. At the end of my working day as head of the CSSD and you'll have to help me with this because I've not been to Switzerland, but I think is it Schultes Clinic?
Excellent.
Aha, I did it. All right, great. At the end of the working day as the head of the CSSD at the Schultes Clinic, I still have to be sure that everything is running smoothly. With SmartHub from Belimed, I am always in the know, even when I'm somewhere else. And that's Mario Roca Sampaio, CSSD manager at Schultes Clinic in Switzerland. And then another quote, Everything is running as it should. The switch to the new SmartHub software went smoothly, and that's a real key. And our employees didn't even notice, which is exactly as it should be. Frank Hintermeyer, General MPAT in Austria. So those are really important key points because seamlessness in transition and implementation is what people want to hear. They don't want to take on a lot of big projects, again, especially when they may be downstaffed. And then also having that knowledge away from the department and being able to be actionable, triaging and providing that support. We also have a case study that's available on our smartphone app that you all provided. So for anybody who has not downloaded the Beyond Clean smartphone app, I want to encourage you to do that now. And then you click on the gift box for this episode that will give you bonus content. And you'll be able to read that case study. And you've also got a promotion going, which is for customers who are upgrading from your older software solution called ICS. You are going to be offering 1 year of complimentary access to the cloud application SmartHub Orbit. Murad, do you want to talk a little bit more about that?
Yeah, that's very correct, Justin. So this is something that we're offering to customers in the US at the moment. The idea is that while ICS is being phased out, so this will basically kind of speed up adoption. And then this is an application that we are continuously developing. So we are working on an Agile development methodology. So what we're doing in this is basically we release the product and we're constantly asking for feedback of how things are working, what are the things that our users see missing in the software, what they would like to see in the software in the next few months. So we basically are implementing that feedback, put it in the development cycle, re-release the product with the additional features. So this is a continuous cycle, and that's one of the reasons why we're kind of promoting so that there's more adoption, more users, more variety of feedback, because what is important to a large SPD with 20 machines may not be the same for maybe a smaller department with 3 or 4 machines. So feedback varies differently, and then we would like all these different environments and users in these environments to basically give us feedback to make this product much more usable, stronger, and relatable.
Just one thing to add here is definitely we talk about the journey here, right? And we talk about the journey towards what we call the smart CSSD on our side, which is ultimately also supporting a smart hospital, meaning that our device is actually sharing data in the context to hospital to make the hospital even more intelligent by the end of the day. So back to the Agile environment is also that it's key to have our customers onboarded as early as possible on this journey, because what we said, it's not our ideas that actually count and our requirements, basically our customers' ideas and requirements that count here. And we want to actually play hard on that fact so that we always stick where can we help making their days easier and more efficient. And that's the overall key here. So that's why onboarding the journey as early as possible is also helping to steer the journey right in a certain direction that these customers will actually want to get into.
Efficiency is really key, and it's going to have to come from technology as the workforce does trend towards shrinking over the next several years as that baby boomer generation, moves more and more into retirement. So we've already known that this was coming, and we already knew that technology and really, some enhanced intelligence and taking data and making it meaningful and actionable on those KPIs for that efficiency is so critical. If you do want to learn more, you can go to belimed.com/SmartHub. And if you already are a Belimed customer and have equipment in your department, if you do want to talk more about the SmartHub solution, you can reach out to your Belimed account representative. You can go right to the website. And again, belimed.com, BELIMED.com, specifically /SmartHub. If you want more information around the SmartHub solution, you can schedule a product demonstration by going to the website. They also have a phone number, 1-800-451-4118. So if you'd rather call and make arrangements for a Belimed sales account representative to come and visit you if you're not a customer, or if you are a customer and you want to get more information. And also, you can ask your service technician to provide more info as they may be visiting your department. You can also find Belimed on social media via LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube, which is great. And I do want to remind everybody about the case study that's available on the smartphone application. So just download, if you haven't already, that Beyond Clean smartphone app find this episode, click on the gift box, and you'll be able to download the case study. Murad and Philip, great job in this interview. I just want to thank you both so much for coming on and for developing a technology that is going to help people make better use of their human resources and maintain uptime on their equipment in their departments that is so critical to the delivery of safe surgery up in the operating room.
Pleasure to be here, Justin. Thank you.
Thanks for having us. Thank you, Justin.
That was Mohammed Murad, Regional Business Owner for Connectivity at Belimed US, and Philip Heim, Global Head for Digitalization at Belimed AG. And specifically, I know many people are familiar with the Belimed equipment, but we really talked very much about the SmartHub solution. And really, in today's environment, this is what we're going to need, is more and more technology with the ability to tailor insights and data depending on the internal stakeholder, whether they're within sterile processing or they're in supporting departments like Biomed, and giving them the information and just the information that they need. Also, the proactivity around preventive maintenance. Nobody can really afford to have the equipment down, and delays or cancellations of procedures these days. Budgets are tightening. Revenue and maintaining cases and on-time starts and everything is so critical. And so this equipment is essential to just about everything that's going up into the OR. And so we want to make sure that that preventive maintenance is happening ahead of time. So having those alerts that are set up, having trending data and a solution and technology behind it that's analyzing that, really, really key. I love the fact that there's two components, that this information for record keeping can get into the instrument tracking system, but the solution isn't really replacing a tracking system. It's augmenting it. So it's giving it the data that it needs. And then the orbit is really a way to look at the condition of the equipment and things that wouldn't need to go into the tracking system. And so those two components really working collaboratively there. I do want to remind everyone that you can follow Belimed on social media. Just search for them on LinkedIn, Facebook, and YouTube. Visit their website, belimed.com. And if you want more specific information about SmartHub, go to belimed.com/SmartHub. And Belimed is spelled Belimed. We've got that case study on the smartphone app, so download the Beyond Clean smartphone app for iPhone or Android. Find this episode and click on the gift box for that case study. And then finally, you can call Belimed directly at 1-800-451-4118. That's going to do it for this vendor spotlight. But as a reminder, you can help support Beyond Clean by subscribing on Apple, Amazon, or Google Podcasts. You can also find us on Stitcher, iHeartRadio, Spotify, or simply search for Beyond Clean on your favorite podcast application. And as I mentioned, bonus content like the one for this episode is available, but you got to download our smartphone app for iPhone or Android. And while you're there on the marketplace, we'd certainly appreciate a rating and a review because your feedback's important to the show. And speaking of feedback, if you have any topics that you'd like us to cover, or maybe you've got a recommended guest, just send us an email to info@beyondclean.net. Thank you for listening to this Vendor Spotlight on Beyond Clean.